We are tracking new developments right now on the IRS targeting of conservative groups and reports that IRS officials in Washington were calling the shots on this effort, rather than the so-called rogue agents out of Cincinnati, who some in the administration want us to believe orchestrated this whole thing. The National Review Online reporting that a man named Carter Hull is now retiring. He's the Washington-based, I say Washington, D.C.-based IRS official that lower-level workers in the Cincinnati office are now saying oversaw, at least in part, singling out of the Tea Party groups. Even one IRS employee calling him, this man Hull, a micromanager, saying you couldn't act in a tax-exempt matter without Carter knowing about it. Joining me now, Eliana Johnson. She's a media editor for the National Review, and she is with me now. Eliana, great report, National Review Online. I encourage people to check it out at nationalreview.com. But let's talk turkey, because we've been told repeatedly by the administration and its defenders, we're talking about two rogue agents, couple rogue agents in Cincinnati who did this. There's not a connection to Washington or to D.C. or any larger faction of the IRS. So who is Carter Hull? Where's he based? And what did he do?
Right, so we've heard that explanation that this was a couple of rogue agents, both from the Obama administration, from the top officials in the IRS, and from some Democratic lawmakers. That now, I think we can say, has been exploded. This was managed from Washington, D.C. from the outset. And National Review reported 2 weeks ago now that what is known as the technical office in Washington, D.C., which is a group of lawyers, was closely involved in handling these cases from the outset, meaning in March of 2010. Carter Hull is one of those lawyers who was handling these cases, and he was the first lawyer to take a look at these Tea Party cases. We know from transcripts of interviews with the House Oversight Committee that he began looking at these cases, and that the reason employees in Cincinnati even began screening for Tea Party cases was due to requests from Washington.
Mm-hmm. What is his relationship, Carter Hull in D.C., to some of the other players that we've seen in this case? Because our Cincinnati affiliate has put together an organizational chart of some of the IRS employees who were involved in this, and they show a woman named Cindy Thomas at the top. This is as far as the Cincinnati office goes. What relationship, if any, between Cindy Thomas and Carter Hull?
So Carter Hull would have been in a different office than Cindy Thomas, but Cindy Thomas was the top woman in Cincinnati overseeing exempt organizations. She answered to Holly Paz in Washington, D.C., who then answered to Lois Lerner, who you've seen a lot about. Now, these lawyers who we're talking about are in Washington, D.C., and they provide guidance, oversight, direction to the Cincinnati office. My sources in Cincinnati say that the employees in the Cincinnati office are incredibly upset with Cindy Thomas, who is the top woman in Cincinnati, for not defending them against the claims of people like Lois Lerner and like former Commissioner Doug Shulman and like acting Commissioner Stephen Miller, that there were rogue agents in Cincinnati at the heart of this scandal.
Right, because they know that they were just following orders, and they weren't rogue, and they were doing what Cindy and Carter Hull and others told them to do. And here's, you referenced the testimony that they've given to the House Oversight Committee. One woman named Elizabeth Hoffaker came out and said, this is a quote, "I was essentially a front person because I had no autonomy or no authority to act on applications without Carter Hull's influence or input." So she places it squarely on him. I mean, the folks who are being thrown under the bus here don't appear to be that comfortable in their new location.
Well, right, and Hoffaker went on to say that she started looking for a job in 2010 because she was so uncomfortable with what she was being told to do from people in Washington. So the other thing I think it's important is to take a step back and to say Carter Hull also is not a rogue agent. He was one of a few lawyers who was charged with providing guidance and overseeing these cases. And as National Review has reported, these lawyers in Washington were rubber stamping the intrusive questionnaires that were sent to Tea Party groups. They were even writing some of the questions, and that's where the backlog that you hear about came from, because there was, all these cases were going to Washington, and agents in Cincinnati were waiting on their verdict. It wasn't just Carter Hall. There were other lawyers in D.C. looking at these cases. They had managers, and those managers had managers.
And as you report, Hofbaker speaks to that, too, in her testimony, the Cincinnati worker, to the House Congressional Oversight Committee, saying, and I quote, "All I remember saying and thinking is, this is ridiculous." This is on the subject of delay. Because at the same time, you're getting calls from irate taxpayers, and I see their point. Even if a decision isn't favorable, they deserve some kind of treatment, and they deserve, timeliness. So now Carter is retiring, Lois Lerner's on paid leave. Two guys at the top have been, forced to leave a little early, and yet we still have no accountability for the actual people implementing the program. Quick last word.
So I think that's where we look at the House Oversight Committee. They're conducting a very careful investigation, and they are going from bottom to top. So starting with the lowest level people involved in the scandal, and they will get to the top. I know from sources there that they are trying to figure out where did that order come from.
They're working their way up. Thank you very much, Eliana.
Thanks, Megan.
Coming up, the president's critics now pointing to the